Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most chilling maritime mysteries of all time, the 1900 Island Moor disappearance. We're heading back in time to a remote Scottish lighthouse where three highly experienced keepers vanished, completely without a trace. There were no farewell notes, no wreckage washing up, just an empty tower, some severely damaged equipment, and a haunting void that spawned over a century of wild speculation and enduring myth. So, let's get right into it.
To truly wrap your head around this mystery, you have to understand the sheer, terrifying isolation of the Eilean Mor Lighthouse. These men lived practically on the edge of the world. Eilean Mor is the largest of the Flannan Isles, which is basically this desolate, uninhabited cluster of rocks about 32 kilometers off the west coast of the Isle of Lewis in the Outer Hebrides. Built by the famous Stephenson engineering family just a year prior in 1899, this station was operated by the Northern Lighthouse Board. The three men stationed here, principal keeper James Ducat, assistant Thomas Marshall, and occasional keeper Donald MacArthur, were entirely at the mercy of the vast, unforgiving North Atlantic.
Okay, let's dive into this agonizing timeline because this is where things get incredibly eerie. The first sign of trouble came on the night of December 15th, when passing ships noticed the Eilean Mor light had gone completely dark. Now, a relief tender, the Hesperus, commanded by Captain James Harvey, was actually scheduled to swap the keepers out on December 20th, but severe westerly gales kept the ship ashore for 6 extra days. By the time the Hesperus finally reached the rock at noon on December 26th, the island was utterly deserted. When relief keeper Joseph Moore went ashore alone to investigate, he walked into a completely abandoned station and found a cold, unlit hearth.
Now, if you've ever heard of the Flannan Isles mystery before, you've almost certainly heard the chilling legend that surrounds it. According to popular lore, when Moore stepped into the living quarters, he found a meal of meat and cheese left completely untouched on the kitchen table and an overturned chair, painting this vivid picture of a frantic, panicked flight from the room. And most famously, the legend claims the station's logbook contained bizarre final entries written by principal keeper James Ducat describing a storm the like of which I have never seen, alongside accounts of these hardened, experienced keepers weeping and praying in fear. The absolute most unsettling part of this legend? Mainland weather records prove the seas outside were completely calm during those supposed dates of terror.
And according to that same legendary logbook, the final haunting entry written by the keepers simply read, "God is over all." It's an incredibly ominous detail. It pushes the ghostly dread of this story to its absolute peak, forcing you to picture something truly unnatural creeping up the winding stairs of the lighthouse, while three desperate men just prayed for their lives. But here's where we execute a massive narrative pivot. Those terrifying details, the untouched meal, the overturned chair, the weeping men, and that famous "God is over all" quote, they were completely invented. Yep, made up. These spooky sensory details actually come from two primary sources of fiction. The first is a famous 1912 dramatic ballad called Flannan Isle by the poet Wilfred Wilson Gibson, who just invented dialogue and details wholesale. The second is a later hoax article published in a 1929 magazine called True Strange Stories. They spliced this fiction into the cultural record so deeply and so effectively that most audiences today actually mistake it for eyewitness testimony.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how modern historical analysis meticulously dismantles this whole supernatural myth. In a 2014 studies monograph, historian Mike Dash cross-referenced the Northern Lighthouse Board records against Hebridean Coast Guard logbooks, and the truth is far less theatrical, but honestly equally baffling. There was no uneaten meal. Joseph Moore explicitly reported the kitchen utensils were clean and tidy. There was no overturned chair. And those terrified log entries? The actual final entries were just routine weather readings on a little slate. Crucially, Dash's analysis of the inquiry depositions revealed that the keeper's behavioral record in the weeks prior showed absolutely none of the psychological deterioration that popular isolation or cabin fever hypotheses require. The men were perfectly stable.
So sweeping away all the poetry and the hoaxes transitions us from a ghost story into a cold, hard, forensic historical investigation. On December 29th, the Northern Lighthouse Board superintendent Robert Muirhead arrived on the island to conduct an official on-site inquiry. Muirhead handled this as an internal accident investigation, gathering physical evidence and taking statements. But keep this in the back of your mind. Muirhead's original handwritten field notes are currently held at the Northern Lighthouse Board archive in Edinburgh. And as we'll see shortly, they reveal a deeply unsettling contradiction to the official story. The true clues Muirhead and his team found inside paint a bizarrely calm picture. The exterior doors were securely closed, but unlocked. Inside, the lighthouse lamps were trimmed, the lenses were cleaned, and the oil fountain was full. The clocks had stopped, which suggests they'd been sitting untouched for over a week. Most importantly, all the routine chores for the morning of December 15th were completely finished. This starkly contrasts with the sheer violence of the environment outside. It points to 3 perfectly calm men who finished their morning routine, prepped for the evening, and then inexplicably vanished sometime in the afternoon.
So the crucial point is this number, 110 feet. That's taller than a 10-story building. While the inside of the lighthouse was pristine, the west landing outside was a scene of absolute oceanic carnage. Muirhead found that at 110 feet above sea level, heavy iron tramway railings used for hauling supplies had been literally bent and twisted inward. A heavy wooden mooring box was smashed wide open. Even a massive 1-ton boulder had been displaced. I mean, the sheer physical force required to do this at 110 feet in the air is just staggering. But modern science actually complicates this picture even more. When this physical evidence was re-examined against tidal modeling data published by the Scottish Association for Marine Science in 2018, researchers found the math simply doesn't add up.
Now, if the West Landing had taken a massive beating, the keepers obviously had a compelling reason to go down there in foul weather to secure their equipment, right? But that leads us directly to the single most baffling anomaly of the entire case that exists in the real record. Why on earth would an experienced lighthouse keeper go out into a freezing winter squall in just his shirt sleeves?
And that brings us to the wardrobe anomaly. The official published narrative tells a very specific, tidy story. James Ducat and Thomas Marshall's heavy coats were missing, while occasional keeper Donald MacArthur's coat was left hanging right on its peg. The neat implication here is that MacArthur rushed out in a frantic hurry to help his colleagues, completely unequipped for the freezing weather. But here is where the story breaks wide open. Remember Muirhead's original handwritten field notes in Edinburgh? Well, they completely contradict his own published findings. Those archival notes record that 2 sets of oilskins actually remained on their hooks, and only the third keeper's coat was missing. This absolutely crucial detail was quietly left out of the final report, and it even contradicts Muirhead's own inventory list on the preceding page. This archival contradiction completely fractures the neat narrative that 2 men were working outside and 1 ran to help.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the official investigation handled the mystery. Despite this glaring contradiction, Muirhead needed to close the case. He concluded the men were swept away by an extra-large sea, which is exactly what modern oceanography calls a rogue wave. For decades, mariners had described these freak, catastrophic walls of water that just appear out of nowhere. Presenting this rogue wave theory was really the Board of Trade's attempt to neatly package a chaotic mystery and reassure a grieving public. They heavily relied on a simplified version of events while entirely ignoring the contradictory coat inventory hidden away in the archives.
Superintendent Muirhead's final official verdict read, "I'm of the opinion that an unexpectedly large roller had come up on the island and a large body of water had come down with immense force and swept them away." That was it, the official published verdict, and it paints a tragic, understandable picture. But as we now know from Muirhead's own contradictory handwritten notes and that 2018 Scottish Association for Marine Science modeling data, this neat official story fits literally no single scenario the actual record can sustain.
You know, we all love a good mystery, and we love to fill in the gaps with ghosts, curses, and poetry. But looking at the true, unvarnished evidence of the Island Moor disappearance leaves us with a deeply provocative thought. The true terror isn't just the awesome, indifferent power of nature. It's the dread of the unknown. We invent myths simply because we are afraid to face that reality. It is the unsettling fact that official records were smoothed over, facts contradicted each other, and over 120 years later, modern science still cannot tell us exactly what happened to those 3 men. Sometimes the most terrifying mysteries are the ones where the real historical record is just as fragmented and haunting as the ghost stories we invent. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it gave you a brand new perspective on this deeply unsettling piece of maritime history.